Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk to you about a woman of strength, a woman of faith, a woman who fights battles no one sees. She prays in silence, she cries when no one is watching, and yet she stands. She stands when she's tired. She stands when she's afraid. She stands even when everything in her life is trying to knock her down. There are moments in life when it feels like no one understands what you're going through. You wake up every morning, put a smile on your face, and do what needs to be done. You love, you serve, you give, and sometimes you feel like you have nothing left. But let me tell you something. Just because you feel alone doesn't mean you are alone. God sees you. He sees your sacrifices. He sees the nights you lay awake, wondering how you'll make it through. He sees the times you've held your tongue when you could have spoken in anger. He sees when you've forgiven, even when it hurt. And He sees the strength in you that you don't even see in yourself. A strong woman of faith doesn't wait for someone else to fight her battles. She gets up, she prays, and she moves forward. She knows that no matter how hard the fight is, God is always fighting for her. She may feel weak, but His strength is made perfect in weakness. She may feel overlooked, but He calls her chosen. She may feel broken, but He is the God who restores. So don't let the struggles of life convince you that you are defeated. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. And you are not fighting this battle by yourself. The same God who walked with Esther, who strengthened Deborah, there are times in life when it feels like no one notices what you go through. You wake up every morning, go about your responsibilities, and do what is expected of you. You take care of your family, handle your work, support those around you, and sometimes it seems like no one even stops to ask if you're okay. The weight you carry feels heavy, yet you keep moving forward because that's what you've always done. But deep down, there's a longing to know that someone sees, that someone understands, that someone recognizes the effort you put in. God sees. When you wake up in the middle of the night with worries on your mind, He sees. When you hold back tears in front of others because you don't want to look weak, He sees. When you go out of your way to help someone who may never even say thank you, He sees. He sees the sacrifices you make, the struggles you endure, and the silent prayers you whisper when no one else is around. It's easy to feel invisible in a world that moves so fast. People get busy with their own lives, and sometimes you might wonder if anyone truly cares. But God never overlooks you. He watches over you with love, paying attention to every detail of your life. He knows the burdens you carry, the pain you've endured, and the strength it takes for you to keep pressing on. You don't have to announce your struggles for Him to take notice. He already knows. There are moments when you feel like you're fighting battles alone. You put on a brave face, but inside you're weary. The enemy whispers that no one cares, that you're forgotten, that everything you do goes unnoticed. But those are lies. God not only sees you, He values you. You are precious in His eyes, and He never takes for granted a single act of obedience, a single step of faith, or a single tear you've shed. Think about Hagar in the Bible. She was a woman who felt abandoned, unseen, and alone in the wilderness. She had no one to turn to, no one to help her. But God met her in that place, called her by name, and revealed Himself as El Roi, the God who sees. He did not ignore her pain. He did not leave her to figure things out on her own. He showed her that she was never alone, even in the hardest moments of her life. The same God who saw Hagar sees you. The same God who cared for her cares for you. He sees when you push through exhaustion to keep going. He sees when you pray for your family, even when you don't have the strength to pray for yourself. He sees when you choose to trust Him, even when everything around you suggests otherwise. And because He sees, He will sustain you. He will strengthen you. He will remind you that your efforts are not in vain. Even when others don't notice, He does. Even when you feel unappreciated, He honors your faithfulness. And even when you feel like you have nothing left, He is right there, ready to lift you up and carry you forward. You don't have to strive to be noticed. You don't have to fight for recognition. You don't have to wonder if your pain is insignificant. God sees everything, and in His eyes, nothing about you is small or forgotten. There are moments in life when you feel like you have nothing left to give. You wake up exhausted, drained from the battles you fight every day. You try to stay strong, but deep down, you know you're running on empty. You hold it together for everyone else, but inside you're wondering how much longer you can keep going. The weight of responsibilities, disappointments, and struggles makes you feel weak. And in those moments, the enemy whispers, "You're not strong enough. You'll never make it." But here's the truth. You don't have to be strong on your own. God never asked you to carry everything by yourself. He never expected you to have it all together. In fact, He already knew there would be times when you would feel weak, and that's exactly why He promises to be your strength. His word says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. That means your weakness is not a sign of failure. It's an opportunity for God to show His power in your life. So many people believe they have to be strong all the time. They think admitting weakness means they're not good enough, not spiritual enough, not capable enough. But God doesn't see it that way. When you're weak, He steps in. When you're tired, He lifts you up. When you feel like you're falling apart, He holds you together. Your strength isn't in your own ability, it's in Him. Think about a child trying to carry something too heavy. No matter how hard they try, they just can't do it. But when a loving parent steps in and lifts the burden, the child no longer has to struggle alone. That's what God does for you. He sees the weight you're carrying, and He's saying, "Let me help you. Let me be your strength." You don't have to push through on your own. You don't have to pretend you're okay when you're not. You just have to lean on Him. God's strength is different from human strength. Human strength runs out. It reaches a limit. But God's strength is endless. He never grows tired, never runs low, never wavers. When you rely on your own strength, you'll always feel like you're barely making it. But when you rely on His, you'll find a power that never fails. Think about the story of Gideon. He felt weak, incapable, and unqualified. But God told him, "Go in the strength you have," Judges 6:14. That didn't mean Gideon had to figure everything out on his own. It meant that even with his doubts, even with his fears, God would supply the strength he needed. The same is true for you. You don't have to feel strong to be strong. You just have to trust that God will give you what you need exactly when you need it. Some days, strength looks like taking one more step forward, even when you're tired. Some days, strength looks like whispering a prayer, even when you don't have the words. Some days, strength is simply deciding not to give up. And in all of it, God is right there, giving you more strength than you realize. So when you feel weak, don't let the enemy convince you that you're defeated. You are not. Your strength may run out, but God's never will. And as long as He is with you, you will always have exactly what you need to keep going. There are times in life when feelings try to take control. You wake up in the morning, and if you feel strong, you move forward with confidence. But if you feel discouraged, tired, or overwhelmed, you start to wonder if you can even make it through the day. Emotions are powerful, and if you're not careful, they can dictate your decisions, your attitude, and even your faith. But here's the truth. Faith is not based on how you feel. Faith is based on what you know to be true. Feelings come and go. They rise and fall like the waves of the ocean. One moment you feel full of hope, and the next, doubt creeps in. One day you feel strong, and the next you feel like giving up. But God's promises never change. No matter how you feel, His word remains the same. The enemy knows that if he can control your emotions, he can keep you from walking in faith. He wants you to believe that if you don't feel God's presence, then He must not be there. He wants you to think that if you feel afraid, then you must not have faith. He wants you to trust your emotions more than you trust God's truth. But that's a trap. Think about this. If a pilot only flew a plane based on what he felt, he would get lost. That's why pilots rely on their instruments, because their feelings can mislead them. In the same way, if you let your emotions guide your decisions, they will take you in the wrong direction. But when you rely on God's Word, you have a solid foundation no matter how you feel in the moment. Look at David in the Bible. He was a man after God's own heart, yet he had moments where he felt abandoned, discouraged, and overwhelmed. He cried out to God, asking, "Why are you downcast, O my soul?" Psalm 32:5. But then he made a choice. He told himself to put his hope in God. He didn't wait for his feelings to change. He commanded his soul to trust in the Lord. That's what you have to do. You can't wait until you feel strong to have faith. You can't wait until fear disappears to step out in obedience. You can't wait until everything makes sense before you trust God. Faith means believing even when you don't feel it. It means standing on God's promises even when emotions tell you otherwise. Think about how many people in the Bible had to act in faith despite their feelings. Moses didn't feel ready to lead Israel out of Egypt, but he trusted God and went. Esther didn't feel brave when she risked her life before the king, but she trusted God and acted. Paul didn't feel victorious when he was in prison, but he still wrote about joy and faith. None of them let their emotions control their decisions. They chose faith over feelings. Your emotions are real, and it's okay to acknowledge them, but they should never have the final say. When fear rises, remind yourself that God has not given you a spirit of fear, 2 Timothy 1:7. When doubt creeps in, declare that God's promises are yes and amen, 2 Corinthians 1:20. When discouragement weighs you down, choose to rejoice, knowing that God is working all things together for your good, Romans 8:28. You may not always feel strong, but you are. You may not always feel like God is near, but He is. You may not always feel like you have enough faith, but even faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. So don't let your emotions decide your future. Let faith lead the way. There are battles in life that no one else sees. You wake up in the morning, put a smile on your face, and do what needs to be done, but deep inside you are fighting. You're fighting thoughts of fear, discouragement, and doubt. You're praying for your family, your children, your future. You're standing in faith even when it feels like everything around you is falling apart. A strong woman of faith knows that prayer is her greatest weapon. She doesn't wait for someone else to fight her battle. She gets on her knees and prays. She knows that her strength doesn't come from her circumstances, her feelings, or even her own ability. It comes from the presence of God in her life. When she prays, she is not just speaking words into the air. She is calling on the power of heaven to move on her behalf. The enemy wants to convince you that prayer is not enough. He wants you to believe that you have to fight in your own strength, figure things out on your own, and carry burdens that were never meant for you. But God has given you a weapon that is more powerful than anything the enemy can throw at you. When you pray, you invite God into your situation. You release His power into your life. You shift the battle from your hands into His. Think about Hannah in the Bible. She was a woman who fought her battle in prayer. She was heartbroken because she could not have children, and instead of taking matters into her own hands, she went to God. She poured out her soul before Him, and He answered her prayer. She didn't fight with people. She didn't let bitterness control her. She fought with prayer, and because of that, God gave her victory. You have the same power in your own life. Whatever battle you are facing, take it to God. If your marriage is struggling, pray. If your children are going down the wrong path, pray. If you are battling sickness, financial trouble, or fear about the future, pray. It may not change overnight, but every time you pray, something shifts in the spiritual realm. The Bible tells us in Ephesians 6:12 that we are not fighting against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of darkness. That means the real battle is not what you see with your eyes, it's what's happening in the spiritual world. That's why prayer is so important. It is not just something nice to do when you have time. It is the key to victory. When you pray, you may not always feel different right away. The situation may not change immediately. But don't be discouraged. Just because you don't see something happening doesn't mean God isn't working. Some battles take time. Some prayers require persistence. That's why the Bible tells us to pray without ceasing. 1 Thessalonians 5:17. Keep praying, keep believing, keep standing in faith. A strong woman of faith doesn't quit when things get tough. She doesn't let fear or doubt steal her confidence. She stands firm, knowing that God hears her prayers and that He is working all things together for her good. She refuses to be defeated because she knows that with God on her side, she has already won. So don't let the enemy convince you that your prayers don't matter. They do. Don't let him make you feel like you have to fight alone. You don't. Every time you pray, you are declaring that God is in control. Every time you pray, you are pushing back the darkness. And every time you pray, you are reminding the enemy that you are a woman of faith who refuses to give up. Keep praying because prayer changes everything. There are times in life when you feel unnoticed, forgotten, or even invisible. You pour your heart into your family, your work, and your responsibilities, yet it seems like no one appreciates the effort you put in. You stay up late, wake up early, give your best, and still there are moments when you wonder, does anyone see me? Does anyone care? But here's the truth. God sees you. He has never taken His eyes off you. Not for a single second. From the moment you were formed in your mother's womb, He knew you. He planned your life with purpose. You are not overlooked. You are not forgotten. You are chosen. The enemy loves to plant seeds of doubt in your heart, whispering lies that tell you that you don't matter. He wants you to believe that you are insignificant, that what you do is not making a difference. But God's Word says otherwise. He calls you His masterpiece, Ephesians 2:10. He says that He has engraved you on the palm of His hand, Isaiah 49:16. That means He carries you with Him always. Think about Hagar in the Bible. She was a woman who felt abandoned and unseen. She had no one to turn to, no one to fight for her. She was cast out into the wilderness alone with her child, wondering if her life even mattered. But in her darkest moment, God appeared to her. He revealed Himself as El Roi, the God who sees. He reminded her that she was never alone. The same God who saw Hagar sees you today. Maybe you feel like your work is unnoticed. You clean, cook, provide, support, encourage, and sacrifice. Yet no one seems to acknowledge it. But God sees. He sees every kind word you speak, every selfless act. He sees the times you put others before yourself. He sees the tears you cry in secret, the moments of exhaustion, the days when you push forward even when you feel like giving up. Maybe you feel like your prayers have gone unheard. You've been praying for your family, your marriage, your children, your future, and it feels like nothing is changing. But God hears every word. He bottles up your tears, Psalm 56, verse 8, since He remembers every prayer you've ever prayed. Just because you don't see an answer yet doesn't mean He isn't working behind the scenes. Some prayers take time. Some breakthroughs require patience. But one thing is certain, He has not forgotten you. The world may not always recognize your efforts, but heaven does. Every sacrifice you make in love is seen. Every act of obedience is recorded. Every moment you choose faith over fear, kindness over anger, and hope over despair, God notices. And in due time He will reward you. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." That means your faithfulness will be rewarded. What you do in secret, God will honor openly. You don't have to fight for recognition. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone. Your value is not determined by the applause of people, but by the love of your Creator. He calls you His daughter. He calls you beloved. He calls you chosen. So even when you feel unseen, hold on to this truth. You are deeply known and deeply loved by God. He has never forgotten you, and He never will. Keep walking in faith. Keep doing what He has called you to do, and trust that He sees every step you take. Life is full of battles. Some are small, daily struggles, and others feel like mountains standing in your way. There are moments when the pressure is so great that you wonder if you will ever overcome. You pray, you fight, you push forward, but sometimes the weight of it all makes you feel like giving up. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. Victory is certain. No matter how hard the battle, no matter how strong the opposition, if God is on your side, you cannot be defeated. It may not look like it right now, and it may not feel like it, but God has already declared the outcome. The battle is not yours. It belongs to the Lord. The enemy wants to convince you that you are losing. He wants you to focus on the struggle instead of the promise. He wants you to believe that the fight will never end, that things will never change, that you will always be stuck where you are. But God has already written the final chapter of your story, and it ends in victory. Think about the story of the Israelites standing before the Red Sea. They had escaped Egypt, but now they were trapped. An army behind them, water in front of them. It looked impossible. It looked like the end. But what did God do? He made a way where there was no way. He parted the sea, and His people walked through on dry ground. The very thing that seemed like an obstacle became their pathway to victory. And when their enemies tried to follow, the waters closed in, and the battle was over. That's what God does. He turns obstacles into opportunities. He takes what the enemy meant for harm and uses it for good. He never promised that life would be easy, but He did promise that He would never leave you, never forsake you, and never allow you to be defeated. Romans 8:37 says, "In all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us." That means you are not just a survivor, you are a conqueror. You don't just barely make it through, you come out stronger, wiser, and more victorious than before. Some battles take time. Some victories don't come immediately. There are seasons where it feels like nothing is changing, but faith means trusting God even when you don't see the results yet. Just because you don't see it now doesn't mean it isn't happening. Think about a seed planted in the ground. You don't see it growing right away, but deep beneath the surface something is happening. At the right time, that seed will break through the soil and grow into something beautiful. Your victory is like that. It's already in motion, even if you can't see it yet. One of the biggest weapons the enemy uses is discouragement. He wants to make you so tired, so weary that you stop fighting. He knows he cannot defeat you, so instead he tries to convince you to quit. But you must stand firm. You must declare that you will not back down. You must remind yourself that if God has brought you this far, He will not leave you now. Victory doesn't mean you won't have battles. It means you won't fight them alone. It means that no matter what comes against you, God has already prepared the way for you to overcome. It means that no weapon formed against you will prosper, Isaiah 54:15. It means that even when things look impossible, God is still in control. So don't be discouraged by what you see. Don't let fear, doubt, or exhaustion convince you to stop believing. The battle may be hard, but victory is guaranteed. Keep moving forward, keep standing on God's promises, and keep trusting that He is fighting for you. Victory is not just possible, it is certain.